I saw him, yeah. Thank you. I've been watching. Thank you. Good morning. It's Palm Sunday. I'm Helen Foss, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you as today's worship associate. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. Welcome to all of you who are here in the sanctuary this morning in person, and all of you at home who are joining us online. Welcome to you all. No matter the hue of your skin or the origin of your ethnicity, welcome whomever you love and wherever you are on your spiritual journey. If you're new to First Unitarian, I invite you to check out our website, firstuuwilm.org, to learn more about us and to sign up for our email newsletter. It will come to you every Friday in your inbox. Now, I am quite intrigued by Reverend Larry's topic this morning. As soon as I read his reference to calling, I thought about going to my first UUA General Assembly, Spokane, Washington, in 1995. I went with Betty Stapleford, a longtime First U member who felt the calling there to the UU ministry. I was thrilled with my experience and the deep dive of all the UU experiences there and the camaraderie. I'm sorry. But Betty was moved. She was called to enter divinity school, become a UU minister, and to serve churches in California for the past 20 years. For her, it was a calling for what the world needed from her. Reflecting on the idea of calling, I realize now that I really had a similar experience when I was drawn to the Green Circle program. I've mentioned my Green Circle work before, how we help children to understand how they felt when they were included in someone's circle of caring, and how they felt when they were excluded. The next step, of course, was to build empathy for what they might do, to learn what they might do impacts how others feel, and to put themselves in another person's shoes. As a teacher, I knew that work would create a more effective learning environment. And as we moved into desegregation in 1978, it was clear this would be important work as students would be encouraging new differences in their classrooms. And I was called to be there, to give leadership, to roll up my sleeves and get into the classrooms to work with children, called to get funding, to create training for volunteer facilitators and create those who volunteer and recruit those volunteer facilitators to take the program into classrooms across Newcastle County, to get districts and then schools to want to provide the experience for students. It was what the world needed from me, although I could not have framed it that way at the time, but indeed it was. Perhaps some of you are thinking of a time when you felt a calling to do something that the world needed from you. Now, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, minister here at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. I'm taking a good look at you. It's great to see you, and it's great to see some people visiting us today. I heard, Kathy, last week that when you and I were both away, that a worship associate said, well, the adults are gone. We can play. Well, we're back to serious stuff today. It's good to see you. It's good to hear a lot of the chatter as we began today. But I do begin this day with a little bit of a heavy heart because once again, we've had another mass shooting in this country. As you know, on Monday in Nashville, 3 adults, 3 children, 3 9-year-olds were killed. This is, I can hardly say the number, but this is the 129th mass shooting this year. So I will light this candle for us to remember during this service this recent shooting. But in truth, I want to light 129 candles in this sanctuary if I could. In truth, I want us to write 129 letters to our representatives this week. Or 1 letter for 129 days to express our outreach and our deep desire that this violence, this unnecessary access to automatic weapons should cease. Would someone join me this week in writing those letters? It's not enough for us to light candles unless we also become ignited and express our deep concern for our world and for the violence that persists. We show up here because we care. We show up here because we want to take a stand for a greater compassion and a greater justice in our world. So it's in that spirit I ask you to join with me in saying our unison affirmation, which appears on the screen. Let's say this together. We affirm that love is our greatest purpose, accepting one another as the truest form of faithful living. The search for truth is our constant star. We pledge our hearts, our minds, and our hands to challenge injustice with courage, to find hope in times of fear, and to live out our Unitarian Universalist values every day as a beloved community. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all that is sacred in life.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to light it now as Reverend Larry lights our chalice here in the sanctuary. We Kindle This Flame by Philip Randall Giles. We kindle this flame as a symbol of the light we would keep glowing in our lives. Appreciation for all those who differ, loving kindness for those who suffer, esteem for all who remind us of our heritage, and calling as agents of the Most High. Rise now as you're willing and able, and join in singing hymn number 145 as Tranquil Streams.
Streams
Please join me now in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
Let's find a place of stillness within ourselves. Maybe feel our feet flat upon the ground. Feel our body held by the chair. Feel the presence of those in this room. Feel our own hearts beat and rhythm of our breath. Be still and know that I am love. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and. Be still. Be. Be. Be still. Be still and. Be still and know. Be still and know that. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I am God. Let us join now in a time of shared silence as we prepare our hearts for the prayers of the people that are gathered here and online today. Let us begin this time where we gather the prayers of the people by first attending to the concerns in our own heart, our concerns for ourselves, our concerns for our loved ones, and our concerns for our world. So take a moment now to listen to what it is that you are holding in your own heart before you may choose to share them when I invite you to do so. If you choose to do so, you may now speak those concerns aloud in this room or write them in the chat if you're joining us online. What are the concerns that you are holding in your heart this day? May you not feel that you need to hold these concerns alone. Do you have some joys? Does someone else besides me have some joy that they would like to share this morning as well? I think I saw Jay Harry in the room. That's a joy. Is there another joy that you'd like to share aloud? I'm sorry, what? There's grandchildren here. Okay. That deserves a dance. Okay. Any other joys that you might have? Yes. Just 1 second. For Cynthia.
Being at Longwood with my mom on Friday.
Okay. Being at Longwood with your mother on Friday.
And seeing them there.
And seeing them there.
Michael loves to too.
Yes. Okay. So our lives are an entwining of both sorrows and joys, but we hold them together in each other's company. May all that we have thought of today feel the healing love and compassion that we send them this day. Amen. So I grew up in a Roman Catholic milieu, some of you know this, in which the question, do you have a vocation, primarily meant one thing. The question, do you have a vocation, and those of you who are in the club know this, primarily meant that were you called to the religious life as a priest or a nun? Were you called to give your life in service to God and to the church? Now, occasionally in the parochial school that I attended, particularly around 7th and 8th grade, we would have guest speakers just kind of magically appear in our class who would speak to the boys about the priesthood and the girls about being a nun. Did anyone else have this experience? Okay, my heart goes out to you. The nuns would sometimes talk to us about having a vocation. And we would sometimes pray in the church for more vocations. The expectation seemed to be that this was a necessary question for any young man or young woman to ask themselves at some point, and particularly during adolescence. The pressure felt somewhat subtle until it wasn't. Let me give an example of a not too subtle approach to popping the question. I don't know how exactly it happened, but I remember one summer meeting in the parking lot of the church, which was also the playground for our Catholic school during the week. That day we piled into cars with other boys from other parishes on our way to what was called a summer camp. I was looking forward to the trip away. I particularly liked the role of helping to navigate with the map book, the triptych that the driver had provided. And on the dashboard, there was even a rolling ball compass that would indicate if we were going north or northeast or west. We might call it a prehistoric GPS. So when we arrived after a 6-hour drive, the camp, as it turned out, was actually on the grounds of the Holy Cross Preparatory Seminary in Dunkirk, New York. It was a beautiful sight, wonderful campus, right on the shores of Lake Erie. We were to be there a week. Now, we did have camp activities, sports and games and singing around a big campfire, and we also attended Mass every morning and evening. There's a lot of folk masses at that time with songs by Bob Dylan, the Mamas and the Papas, Tom Waite, and other singers popular at the time. We sang peace songs and civil rights songs, and some mornings we attended simple classes, which I actually liked because I probably was better at class than it was at hitting a home run. One class I recall was on science and religion and the various views of the origin of the world. It was actually fascinating to me at the time. It was the first time I'd heard about the Big Bang Theory. Now, there were a lot of us there from several states, and let's face it, it was a recruiting tactic for discerning who among us would be soldiers of Christ. You see, preparatory seminaries actually existed back then as places where young men could attend this specialized high school and get a taste of what seminary life would be like. And I have to admit that it was an odd summer camp experience. It was like a farm league for seminaries, I suppose. As my religious views changed by the time I was 17 years old, and as I matured and became clearer about my own identity and beliefs, I no longer imagined I would have any interest in a vocation to the Roman Catholic priesthood. Yet the idea of having a vocation, of having a calling, is one that has stayed with me. Calling has meaning for me, even though my understanding of the varieties and the sources of this calling have changed considerably since then. As you know, calling has often been associated in the past with primarily a religious calling, as in a calling to ministry, and the call has often been considered to have happened through divine communication. I do feel called to my work, which means I feel devoted to this ministry, to my ministry in this congregation, and on my best days, I feel my ministry both utilizes and stretches my capabilities and possibilities as a person. But as you know, there are many secular, quote-unquote, books on calling that exist now. I wish for any one of us a sense of calling, of vocation. When I think of calling and the recognition of calling in any one of us, I think of these verses that you may know from Marge Piercy in her poem, To Be of Use. She writes, "The people I love the best jump into work head first without dallying in the shallows and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing the thing worth doing is well done, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. My hope is that we all have experiences like this at some point or sometimes in our lives. Experiences when we as individuals or as part of a group of individuals come together for some endeavor that uses us, spends us, so that the connection between who we are, what we do, seems to flow in one exquisite dance. And we all know that our calling or our vocation is not a question that is answered once and for all. No, we know that there are many seasons of our living and that we may find ourselves at any chapter at any time, reconsidering now what we're called to be and to do. We also do some reconfiguring along the way and some rethreading. Julia Cameron's book, It's Never Too Late to Begin Again, is one of those recent guides that invites people in midlife or retirement to redefine their lives during a time in which they might enjoy more freedom and also find that same freedom daunting as they ask, now what am I called to do? You following me here? Okay, a little breathing helps. One writer offered this analogy about the struggle and the challenge it sometimes is to find and to discover and to recover and to live out our calling. She writes, you can think of your calling as a car that hasn't already been built. You just have to dig it out from under a pile of garbage, activate the engine, and clear the road and go. Some understand calling not so much as a choice, but a destiny, like the perennial acorn that is destined to become an oak tree. In this view, we do not simply have a vocation. Vocation has us. James Hillman, the Jungian analyst, who in his book, The Soul's Code, in Search of Character and Calling, offers this particular perspective. A calling may be postponed, avoided, intermittently missed. It may also possess you completely. Whatever, eventually it will win out. It makes its claim. The call does not go away. Some of you may identify with this understanding of your own calling. Now, whether or not you agree with Hillman's sense of destiny, the destiny of our calling, there are ways in which our sense of calling often expands and continually lures us. I do resonate with Matt Bloom, who wrote, "A calling is meaningful because it connects a person to a virtuous ideal, something bigger and more important than just personal success. Through a calling, a person is able to express his or her truest and most authentic self in and through their work." I also resonate with some of David Spangler's view, who says, "We may receive in our lives the calls that come from the deepest places in ourselves. They are not summonings, but are more like awakenings. They call us to attention." I'm sure any one of us can speak of times when we were awakened by a cause or an interest. Helen described the Green Circle project that she was part of. That felt to me like an awakening to a call, to a cause that seemed to unfold and develop and engage others. I believe that a calling can be deeply personal, can feel like a destiny, can feel like what we are meant to do in this life. And yet I also think that a calling often points outside of ourself as well. Therefore, my favorite understanding of vocation is from Frederick Buechner, who famously wrote, "Vocation is the place where our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." Where our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Maybe calling is always this kind of dynamic that occurs in the alchemy between our own life and the life of the world that surrounds us. Maybe calling is and will always be a synergy between character, who we are, context, where we are, and kairos, the moment that we are in. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, the writer, the author of the book known as Man's Search for Meaning, honed his own understanding of vocation from his observations of those who survived the ordeal of Auschwitz. He recognized that those who had survived created a meaning in a situation that might otherwise destroyed them with despair. Frankl himself had an important manuscript that was sewn into his overcoat at the time that he was captured and arrested and taken to a camp. It was his life work. And when he arrived at the camp, that coat was the first thing that they took away from him. It was at that point he knew that he needed to dedicate himself to that work, that he needed to compose in his own heart and mind what his experiences were in that brutal concentration camp. Frankl, a psychiatrist who became the originator of logotherapy, declared that we should not ask ourselves what we want from life. Instead, he argues, we should ask ourselves, what does life want from us? What does life want from us? I think it can be a mixture of the two, don't you? But to have that other dimension of not just focusing on self, but also focusing on the world around us, again, I think creates a synergy in which vocation can emerge. Frankl says there's a difference between the call from within and the call from outside. It's the difference between ambition and vocation. The former comes from the self, the latter from something outside and larger than the self. So for Frankl, self-actualization wasn't enough. Self-transcendence was also necessary. As we approach the Passover celebration this week, I'm going to suggest that we could reflect on the universal pattern of Moses' call, a central character here during the Passover week, and ask ourselves how it could help us understand about our own approach to being called and to serve a cause outside of ourselves. I think there are patterns in the Moses story of calling that can help us understand our own life calling, whatever our age. Did you hear me say that? Whatever our age? Yes? Okay. You know the story. Moses, while keeping the flocks at his father-in-law's, noticed that there's a small bush on fire, but it's not consumed by the flame. Rabbis have often pointed out that Moses could only have noticed this particular feature of the bush by stopping and choosing to pay close attention to the scene over a period of time. As the text says, God did not call out to Moses until God saw that Moses had turned aside to see, to stay with, and to notice what was happening with that bush. According to the story, it is only when Moses brings his full awareness to the situation before him that God calls, Moses, oh Moses. And it's then that Moses replies, Hineni, I am here. Likewise, our own sense of call, of being awakened to calling at this point in our lives, can only occur if, like Moses, we're able to turn our full attention to how life is addressing us in this moment, so that we too can respond. Hineni, I am here. Let's try that. Hineni, I am here. Try that a few times this week and see if your words actually match your experience. I am here. I am here. So using this pattern of Moses' calling to I would say that discerning our own calling at any particular moment might also require this first movement of attentiveness. To even begin to hear our calling at this moment, at this season of our life, is to attend to what is calling us now. not some previous decade or decades, but what is calling us now. We might ask ourselves, how is life addressing me in this moment? What is life calling me to be or to do? Indeed, Richard Bowles, the author of that classic career guidance book, it's been out, speaking of decades, it's been out for decades. What color is your parachute? He advises his readers to pay attention as they walk through their everyday life, to pay attention, he says, to what calls you, what causes you to pause, what awakens your interest or your passion, or what awakens empathy in you. Try that this week. Just notice what it is that awakens you, that calls to you, that stirs your own sense of empathy. Now, whether you are seeking a career now or not, I think that this first step can still serve us as each of us awaken within our life again and again. Now, the second movement in the account of Moses' calling is that of wondering. As you know, in Moses' story, in the story of Moses, he engages with the presence, speaking to him through the burning bush. Moses asks of that presence, "Who should I say is calling me?" The response, as it is recorded, is, "I am what I am." Or some translate it to say, "I am becoming what I am becoming." I like to think that Moses' willingness to be in wonder allowed him to also hear that same voice within himself. I am what I am. I will become what I will become. Likewise, rather than our immediately turning aside, rather than allowing skepticism to take over, as it sometimes do when we're close to a calling, we might cultivate that quality of wonder, to engage it, to enter into it, to interact with it, to allow ourselves to listen long enough to what we are actually experiencing, to listen to the situation that is capturing our attention, to be in that state of wonder about what is happening rather than to draw quick conclusions. And then there's that third movement of developing a communal consciousness that's beyond just ourselves. In the Moses story, you know, he's being called to step up as an individual, to move into his emerging destiny, but to do so for the sake of something bigger, what Frankl would call something outside of himself, what Frederick Buechner would call the world's deep hunger. For Moses, this means accepting his role to do something about the plight of the Israelites, their liberation, to empathize with their struggle. And likewise, the question for us is, for the sake of what am I responding to this call? Who am I being called to serve? And then finally, in this pattern of Moses' calling, I think there's another message for us as well. It's the message of humility. You see, Moses doubted himself. He didn't want to take on that role. He recognized all of his flaws, but he came to understand that he could still do something without being perfect. Likewise, what What ways do many of us not act on what we're called to do because we have a self-doubt that freezes us? I mean, Moses claimed, I'm not a leader. I don't know how to do this. I'm a stutterer. No one will listen to me. Your list might have different items on it, but it's still the same process. Yet he said yes to being a liberator of the Israelites anyway. So this pattern of attentiveness, of wonder, of communal consciousness, and humility can help us claim our own vocation in the ways that will allow us to live it out, each in our own way. The same pattern, I think, works on the congregational level if we can truly ask ourselves the questions to help us discern a call. What is calling our attention, and how attentive are we? Which voice do we tend to hear, the voice of skepticism or the voice of commitment to the possibility that we can notice when we take time to wonder about what is before us? For the sake of whom do we accept our calling? And what are our capacities? What capacities do we need to develop? And what capacities might we need to call upon to be faithful to our call? Next week, when we tell the story of what some of our members in our congregation have been doing in collaboration with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee to respond to the call of a local family seeking asylum, I see that each of these steps have been involved in that process. So this afternoon after our service, some of us are going to be in conversation about the proposed changes to the UUA bylaws that describe the purposes, the guiding principles, the values, the sources that inspire us. And this process will be occurring over the next year. On the surface, it seems like it's just a periodic review of the association's bylaws. However, you know and I know that over the years, we've tended to use these principles to describe our faith to others. Someone said to me, "What am I going to use for my elevator speech?" Over the years, we've organized our hymnal, singing the living tradition, to coincide with the sources that we list of our living tradition. We've developed religious education resources and worship resources around our principles and our sources of our living tradition since 1985, which to some of us feels like yesterday and to others feels like long ago. The proposed amendments are extensive, and they sometimes feel unmoored from what has become so familiar to those of us who've joined this religious movement since 1985. So it's time, perhaps, to take a fresh look, to ask ourselves, do these proposed amendments define us? And I would say, do they articulate our call and our covenant with one another or not? Now, there's a lot of words involved in these proposed amendments. Some will find these words inspiring. Others will find the words cumbersome. How many of you looked at them? This is a pop quiz. Okay. Years ago, I found this sentiment expressed by Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams to be very grounding for me in the midst of all the words that Unitarian Universalists tend to use and perseverate about. I've often quoted these words by Adams. We deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. we deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. So my question is, what do we do with what we say? That, for me, seems more important than just saying what it is that we say. Is that an amen? I'm looking for it anytime I get it. Thank you for that. How we practice our principles or our values, for me, are essential to that understanding of the necessity of social incarnation. Can they be lived out? James Luther Adams died in 1994 after years as a minister, theologian, social activist, and a mentor for those of us who lived in Boston at the time. Adams saw the mission of the church, and I quote, as the calling of people to continuous conversion, continuous commitment to faith, a faith that asks us challenging questions. So I'm asking these questions about these proposed changes to Article 2. Where do these words lead us? Where do these words call us? To whom do they call us to serve, and in what ways? What do we need to change in ourselves or our congregations and in our world in order to become what we aspire toward? I always want to ask, what is this going to look like in practice? Maybe you can join me in that question. The actual report of the commission included some declarative sentences that I'm going to turn into questions. Do the new principles and purposes guide us in the transformation of ourselves, our communities, and our faith into active networks of collective care, restoration, and justice? Does it seem like a living document that challenges Unitarian Universalists to place the liberation in all of its dimensions of all at the center of our lives? Do they ask us to choose love in action as the path forward? Let those questions resonate in this room, resonate in the parish hall where we'll be gathering after this service, and I'll be very curious to hear our dialogue. So may it be.
As I mentioned in my welcome, Reverend Larry's reference to a calling in the description of his sermon got me to thinking about how I had been drawn to participate and lead the work of the Green Circle program. What I didn't mention was that this church had a cadre of women who were the first Green Circle volunteers who answered the call from the woman who brought Green Circle to Delaware. So, while AAUW enlisted me to take on coordinating Green Circle, women from this church were the beginning core of the volunteers. And so why not? The work of Green Circle was so aligned with our principles and purposes, and as time went on, numbers of us UUs joined us, in taking leadership positions, like Kathy Stan and Pam Weiss. Yes, our faith inspired us to join in. But in addition, our church helped me to refuel as our work continued and as I went on to work in the governor's office and in state government. Sunday after Sunday, entering the sanctuary, I could feel the presence of something. I would be inspired to leave, refueled, ready to carry on. Those years were exciting, challenging, and rewarding, and my church was my rock. Yes, I'll stand here and tell how important our church was, and it was, in raising our children here, and how imperative it was for me to be a part of a religious community that shared my values and more. But I now also realize how important it was for me to have a place to replenish my being. The stewardship moment is a time for each of us to reflect on the importance of church in our lives, as well as the importance of your financial support in keeping it going. We're preparing to wrap up this year's stewardship drive. We've reached 92% of our goal, just $39,000 short. If you've not already, or if you have already pledged, we thank you. If not, please consider doing so as soon as possible. Those of you here in the sanctuary will find someone in the parish hall at the table happy to take your pledge. And those of you at home can pledge online, or you can call the church office and give them your pledge over the phone. Now, in the meantime, we also have this year's church expenses to support with our contributions. Please consider giving generously. Now, please join me in dedicating our offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives and these our offerings. Our words for our extinguishing our chalice are from Maureen Killeran, and I invite you at home, if you have lit a chalice, to extinguish it now. We extinguish this chalice flame, daring to carry forward the vision of this free faith, that freedom, reason, and justice will one day prevail in this nation and across the earth.
So I want to remind you that in the parish hall immediately following the service, those of you who plan to join us in the dialogue around the Article 2 revisions, please go in. I saw the food arriving during the sermon, so there's food there on the table. Join us, find a chair at one of the tables. Lunch, have it right away so we can begin our conversation promptly at 1 p.m. Is that clear? 12 p.m., sorry. From 12 to 1:15 will be our conversation. Thank you. Sorry about that. Following the benediction, we will sing together, answering the call of love. The words will appear on the screen. Please take a moment to greet those around you, particularly greet any newcomers that you might see so that you can get to know them and they can know about the love that we've been talking about is actually tangible. All right? So the benediction. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. So may it be. Amen. Stand as you are willing as we sing together, answering the call of love.